there, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Good to be back.
Let's settle into our study hall today for a bit of Philosophy Friday.
Sounds good.
We're tackling a really fundamental question pulled straight from this stack of sources you've all shared. How exactly do our minds, deal with moral judgments?
The deep one, isn't it?
Yeah.
That powerful feeling you get when something seems clearly right or wrong, or sometimes that confusion when things feel morally murky.
Absolutely. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack some, pretty fascinating insights from these sources. They talk about the surprising ways our emotions and our reason interact.
Or sometimes just outright compete, yeah.
Exactly, compete, especially when we face those really tough moral questions. I mean, think about this for a moment, you listening. Have you ever felt incredibly strongly that something was right or wrong, but then kind of struggled to explain why? Or maybe felt genuinely torn between what just felt right intuitively and what maybe a colder calculation suggested?
That tension,
Yeah.
that internal wrestling match, that's precisely what these sources get into. They suggest our moral minds aren't just one single system, like just following rules or using pure logic.
Right.
Instead, they paint this picture of a dual process brain.
Dual process. Okay.
Yeah, one part is fast, it's intuitive, very emotional, and the other part that's slower, more deliberate, more calculating.
Okay, let's unpack that, this dual process idea. The sources talk about one side as the automatic settings. What's that about?
So that's the quick part, the intuitive bit. It's heavily influenced by our emotions,
Yeah.
gives us that immediate gut feeling. And the sources point to specific brain areas linked to this, emotional processing in moral situations.
Yeah.
Structures like the amygdala, sort of an early alarm system,
You're right.
and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the VMPFC, that's lower down in the front of your brain. It helps kind of integrate those emotional signals into our decisions.
So, quick, almost instinctual emotional response. And the other side, the second process.
That's what they call the manual mode. This is our conscious reasoning, deliberate, explicit thought.
Okay.
This is the part of your brain that can actually slow down, analyze things, weigh different factors. It's typically slower, takes more mental effort than those automatic settings.
The part that tries to think things through carefully, step by step.
Exactly. And its key strength is its flexibility. It's like a general-purpose problem solver, can handle new situations, consider conflicting ideas, look at the bigger picture.
Future consequences, trade-offs.
Right,
Yeah.
all that stuff. And the sources highlight the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, that's more in the upper front area of the brain, as being really important for this kind of deliberate reasoning.
Okay, so you've got this fast, emotional gut reaction automatic mode and the slower, deliberate calculator manual mode. And what these sources really seem to drive home is how these two modes often clash, right?
Yeah.
Especially with moral dilemmas.
Oh, yeah. And that clash is just perfectly illustrated by those classic philosophical thought experiments, the trolley problems.
Yes, the trolleys. Okay, so the famous one, runaway trolley, heading for 5 people tied to the track. You can pull a lever, divert it onto another track.
Where it will kill one person instead.
Right. And most people pretty quickly say it's morally okay, maybe even required, to pull the lever.
Right. And the sources explain that in these kinds of impersonal cases, the situation doesn't seem to trigger a really strong negative emotional response from that automatic system.
Okay.
So as a result, the manual mode's sort of utilitarian reasoning, the logic that says saving 5 lives is better than saving one that tends to win out.
Makes sense.
And brain imaging studies actually show more activity in the DLPFC, that reasoning area, in these kinds of scenarios.
Okay, so reason wins when strong emotion isn't really in the picture. But then there's the other version, the footbridge dilemma.
The personal one.
Right. Trolley's still heading for the 5 people, but now you're standing on a footbridge over the tracks and there's a large person next to you.
And the only way to stop the trolley is to push this person off the bridge.
Sacrificing them to block the trolley and save the 5. And most people say that's morally wrong, even though the outcome numerically is the same, 5 saved, 1 lost.
And here, the sources argue the very personal nature of physically pushing someone that really activates the automatic emotional system, big time. The VMPFC and the amygdala fire off that powerful emotional alarm. And this gut feeling, this don't do it, tends to override the manual mode's calculation about saving more lives.
Wow.
So the key insight here is that when that automatic emotional system is strongly engaged, because the action feels so personal, so direct, it often dictates our moral judgment, even if the logic might point the other way.
So my gut just screams, don't push. even if my reasoning side is whispering, "But 5 people."
Precisely. Although the sources do note it's not impossible for the manual mode to override the alarm, even in these personal dilemmas. It just takes a lot more cognitive effort. You really have to fight that gut feeling.
Okay, let's dig into another really fascinating point these sources bring up about our intuitions. They introduce this hypothesis. It's trying to explain a very specific moral difference people often feel.
Ah, right. The difference between harming someone as a means to your goal versus harming them merely as a foreseen side effect.
Yeah, philosophers call it the doctrine of double effect, but these sources offer more of a cognitive explanation for why we feel that distinction so strongly.
This is where they propose the modular myopia hypothesis.
Modular myopia. Okay.
Yeah, it suggests there's this sort of cognitive subsystem, probably operating in that automatic mode, that acts like an action plan inspector.
An action plan inspector, like checking our plans.
Kind of, yeah. It seems to monitor our conscious plans and triggers an emotional alarm bell, specifically when we're thinking about actions that involve harming other people,
An internal alarm specifically for plotting harm.
essentially. But here's the key part. It's myopic, short-sighted.
Short-sighted. How so?
It's primarily sensitive to harms that are part of the main causal path of our plan, the harms we actually intend to inflict as a means to get to our goal.
Ah, okay. So pushing the person in the footbridge case, you are using that person's harm directly as the means to stop the trolley. That's on the main path. Alarm goes off.
Exactly. Now compare that to pulling the lever in the first trolley case. Your goal is to divert the trolley to save the 5. The death of the one person on the sidetrack is, well, it's a terrible outcome, but it's a foreseen side effect of your action.
Not the direct means by which you save the 5.
Right. And this myopic module seems less sensitive, maybe even kind of blind, to harms harms that happen on secondary causal chains or as indirect consequences.
Okay.
The sources use an analogy. It's like your brain focuses hard on processing the main melody of a song, but pays less attention to the background harmonies.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
why? Why would our brains evolve a system like that? That seems kind of specific.
Well, the hypothesis suggests this action plan inspector might have evolved partly as a check on our manual mode's powerful planning abilities.
Okay.
I mean, while manual mode is great for complex problem solving, it also makes premeditated violence possible, right? Using others in a calculated way for our own ends.
Right. Cold calculation.
It's this emotional module, this alarm bell, it acts as a crucial brake, specifically on using other people as tools for our goals, which you can imagine would have been incredibly disruptive to cooperation back in the small groups where our brains were evolving.
Ah, okay. Speaking of cooperation, these sources really connect this whole dual process idea to social problems, specifically that tension between, individual self-interest and the collective good.
Yeah, they bring up classic examples like the prisoner's dilemma
Uh-huh.
and the tragedy of the commons. These highlight what the sources call the me versus us problem.
Me versus us. How do individuals who all have their own competing interests manage to actually coexist and cooperate successfully?
Right. And the core insight here, maybe surprisingly, is that cooperation isn't always the result of careful manual mode calculation.
Meaning, we don't always logically reason our way into being good cooperators.
Precisely. The sources argue we seem to have evolved what they call moral machinery, a whole suite of psychological tools and emotional dispositions, mostly operating within that automatic mode,
Okay.
that instinctively nudge us toward cooperative strategies. Things like empathy, gratitude, a tendency to forgive, even emotions like anger and disgust when norms are violated, or feelings of guilt. These aren't just random feelings.
They have a function.
Yeah, they function as powerful counterweights to purely selfish impulses. They help promote cooperation, stabilize it, especially in our personal relationships and small groups. It's like our automatic system is trying to solve that me versus us problem by giving us these pro-social instincts and feelings.
So our feelings are actually a really crucial part of our evolutionary toolkit for just getting along.
That's what the research seems to suggest. You see it in experiments. There's a link between people who act cooperatively, more intuitively in things like the prisoner's dilemma, and having a generally trusting nature. And of course, our intuitions about cooperation are also shaped quite a bit by the culture we grew up in.
Okay, that makes sense for cooperation within a group. But what happens when different groups interact? Maybe groups with different cultural norms, different gut feelings about morality. This brings us to the U.S. versus them problem.
And according to these sources, yeah, our brains seem profoundly wired for tribalism.
Tribalism.
We have this powerful automatic tendency to divide the world into you as our in-group and them, the out-groups, and, to instinctively favor our own.
And this isn't something we just learn entirely.
It seems to appear really early in development. Infants pick up on social cues to figure out who's in their group. And while categories like race aren't, innate biological categories for groups, they can easily become markers for group membership.
Just like any arbitrary criteria can, like in those social psychology experiments where they create groups based on, like, coin flips.
Exactly. Red team, blue team. And this tribalism, it can lead to conflict. Not just because individuals are selfish, but because different groups can have genuinely incompatible ideas about what a moral society should even look like.
Right. Different values, different priorities.
Yeah. The sources mention examples of cultural differences, like the Southern culture of honor in the U.S., where maybe more aggressive responses to perceived insults might be intuitively expected within that group, which contrasts with norms elsewhere.
And it's not necessarily about one group being objectively bad or immoral.
Not necessarily, no. It's about different groups cooperating and interacting based on different ingrained sets of intuitive responses and values, different automatic settings, if you like.
And this tribal loyalty, this us versus them thinking, it has a really profound effect on how we even perceive reality, doesn't it? Including what we accept as facts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The sources highlight how, on really complex, identity-linked issues, climate change is a key example they use. People's views often line up more closely with their tribal identity, their political group, their social group, than just with their level of scientific understanding.
So it's not just about knowing the science.
Not always, no. What's really fascinating, or maybe worrying, is how deeply this tribal membership can lead to biased perceptions of fairness or selective processing of information. People might unconsciously adjust their sense of what's fair to benefit their own group. Or they might just adopt the beliefs of trusted members of their tribe, even if those beliefs seem to clash with objective evidence or what experts are saying.
Like the climate change skepticism example being higher in certain political groups. The sources suggest it's not necessarily because those individuals have a direct financial stake in denying it,
Right.
but because adopting that view is actually rational for them within their social tribe. It maintains belonging, avoids getting kicked out of the group.
It's a powerful example of that commons problem idea, but playing out in the realm of beliefs. What's rational for my personal social survival fitting in with my tribe might conflict with what's best for the collective good of accurately understanding the world.
Wow. And this whole tribal dynamic, it also shapes the language we use, right? Especially when we argue about really controversial issues. The sources specifically call out how often appeals to rights get used.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point they make. The material argues that fundamentally, we don't really have a foolproof, non-circular way to definitively prove which rights exist or how to prioritize them when they clash.
Independent of looking at the actual consequences of upholding those rights.
Exactly, independent of the real-world outcomes.
And yet people constantly assert conflicting rights, don't they? Like a right to life versus a right to choose in the abortion debate, for instance. And these asserted rights often seem to align perfectly with their pre-existing moral feelings and their tribal loyalties.
And here's where it gets really interesting, psychologically speaking. The sources suggest that in these big moral controversies, appeals to rights often function less as tools for reasoned debate.
And more as what?
More as intellectual free passes, or like playing a trump card in an argument.
I mean, they just shut down the conversation, stop the back and forth.
Precisely. Think about it. Instead of engaging in a potentially difficult, effortful, manual mode discussion about consequences, trade-offs, maybe finding some shared values, just asserting an absolute right allows someone to effectively end the argument. It reinforces their emotionally driven, probably tribally influenced position without needing further justification.
So you don't have to engage with counter-arguments about outcomes or complexities.
Right. It's a powerful way to make an emotionally held position feel like an unassailable, objective principle. It kind of short-circuits the whole process.
So if my automatic system, maybe influenced by my tribe, tells me something is deeply wrong, I can just declare, well, it violates a fundamental right, and feel totally justified, and stop listening to arguments about consequences or other points of view.
That's the function the sources propose. This kind of rights talk often serves in heated public debates, yeah. It can effectively bypass that more effortful manual mode process of weighing complex outcomes or looking for common ground that might cut across tribal lines.
Okay. So, given all of this, I mean, the competing systems in our heads, the powerful emotional alarms, the deep tribal biases, the way we use language like rights to sometimes shut down debate, how are we possibly supposed to navigate the incredibly complex moral problems of the modern world?
That's the huge question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, our brains evolved, as you said, to solve problems in small, tight-knit groups, not global issues like climate change or mass inequality or managing these vast, diverse, interconnected societies we live in now.
And this really raises a critical point. If our moral instincts, our automatic settings, are geared towards small group cooperation and tribal loyalty, can they possibly guide us effectively in this globalized world?
Can our gut feelings handle problems at this scale?
Maybe not always.
Mm.
The sources propose that perhaps we need something like a metamorality.
Metamorality.
Yeah, a framework for resolving disagreements between groups that have different moral ideals. Much like regular morality helps individuals with different selfish interests find ways to cooperate.
Okay, so a morality for dealing with different moralities. And what kind of approach do the sources lean towards for this metamorality?
It seems to be a form of, well, deep pragmatism,
Pragmatism. Okay, meaning?
meaning moving beyond just asserting conflicting ideals or these absolute non-negotiable rights we just talked about.
Mm.
Instead of getting stuck on trying to figure out which group has the one correct set of moral principles, the pragmatic approach asks different questions. Like, what actually happens if we implement this policy? What are the likely consequences? What impact will this have on actual human well-being?
So, focusing on shared human experiences, like happiness, suffering, health, security,
Yeah.
things like that, that seems like it could be a potential common currency, doesn't it? Something people from different tribes with different gut feelings might actually agree is valuable.
That's the hope presented in the sources, yes. It's about looking for empirical evidence. What does the data say about what actually works to promote well-being? It means acknowledging our own biases, the limits of our intuitions,
Right.
and being willing to engage in difficult trade-offs for the greater good, even when it clashes with some of our automatic emotional responses or our tribal loyalties.
This approach really seems to fundamentally require engaging our manual mode, doesn't it? Our deliberate reasoning. To look at the big picture, consider consequences impartially.
And actively try not to let our automatic emotional responses or our tribal affiliations just rigidly dictate the outcome, especially when we're dealing with these large-scale, abstract problems that our instincts maybe weren't designed for.
Yeah.
It's a demanding path, no doubt. It requires a certain intellectual humility, admitting we don't know everything about complex systems, and a real commitment to seeking evidence to guide our actions towards better outcomes for everyone, not just for us.
And it really strongly suggests that those powerful moral feelings, those intuitions, while they're incredibly valuable for navigating our daily lives and relationships in smaller groups, might not always be reliable guides for these huge, complex, abstract global challenges we face today.
Absolutely. What this deep dive really underscores is that our moral common sense, while it's a product of evolution and often helpful,
Yeah.
it can sometimes be maladaptive. It can lead us astray when applied to situations vastly different from the ancestral environment where it evolved.
It's like that analogy you hear sometimes. Our evolved taste for sugar or fat, which was great for survival when those things were scarce,
Right. Kept us alive.
but can be actively harmful in a world where they're super abundant. Our intuitions can be like that.
That's the idea. It suggests we need to use our manual mode, our reasoning, not just to come up with justifications for our gut feelings after we've already had them.
Uh-huh. The rationalization trap.
Right. But to sometimes deliberately question those gut feelings, or maybe even override them, based on a more careful, reasoned assessment of the consequences and overall well-being.
So this deep dive seems to suggest that finding that common currency, shared human well-being, things like happiness, suffering, flourishing, and coupling that with a commitment to evidence and a recognition of our own biased intuitions, that might be the most promising path forward.
For navigating the really difficult moral landscape
Yeah.
of the modern world, yeah, that seems to be the direction the sources point.
It certainly gives you a lot to think about.
Definitely. And it raises this really important question, doesn't it? If our deeply held moral feelings, our intuitions, are, at least in part, kind of like those evolutionary tastes.
Yeah, like the sugar taste.
Developed for promoting cooperation in ancient tribal environments. Well, how do we figure out when those moral tastes are actually serving us well in the modern world and when they might be misleading us.
Right. How do we check our powerful intuitions against something? Well, something more reliable.
Right.
And what could that something even be?
That's the central challenge, I think. And it's one that, as the sources suggest, really requires acknowledging the limits of our intuition, actively seeking evidence about what truly fosters well-being, and constantly looking for that shared human experience as our guide.